go over the whole thing of ethnography. You're having my notes. I'm just passing around my notes. So ethnography, this is kind of awkward for me. I feel like I need to be here at Blackboard, so I'm going to move. About the field of anthropology or cultural anthropology is the use of this, prefix ethnos and how it's been attached to words like ethnicity. You see this as a kind of prefix for the word like ethnicity, which is used in our society as a definer of one's origins, roots. The equivalent for quote-unquote race, but in many ways for people who are like Italian American, Jewish American, who would be seen as white, then their ethnicity, the specificity of their ethnicity is that they're Italian, Russian, Jewish, whatever. You see what I mean? Irish American, etc. There's a lot of conflict in the field of social sciences as to the relationship between the word race and therefore racedness and ethnicity. Ethnicity being the safe kind of way of talking about race. Nonetheless, this word ethno or ethnos is a central part of cultural anthropology because it defines the strategy that people use who are in this particular social science to go someplace and study a group of people with, by looking at their lifestyle, the mores, values, and culture that they have that is shared, transmitted, right, and learned. It's learned, shared, and transmitted from generation to generation. And also, like in a group like this, you could say that we're going to be sharing pieces of our own culture. So, one of the problems associated with ethnography, that is, here I am, anthropologist extraordinaire. I am going over here far away, because anthropology is, after all, the study of the far away, the over there, not the safe, the in here. That's sociology, right? So I go over here and I study, and I go to Papua New Guinea in the South Pacific. And I hone in on the group, the ethnic group of this person. Now there it might be called ethnic group if I'm in Africa. A lot of Africans refer to their own ethnic group as tribe. It's not just, on the other hand, there are a lot of Africans who just refuse to use that word by saying that it is so fraught with racialism. So they throw out the word tribe and say, in effect, tribe exists only one place in the minds of Westerners who come trotting over here looking for tribalism, okay? So, one of the critiques that people have made about ethnography is that it hones in on the habits that Sarah has, the relationships in her immediate environs, in this community that she identifies as her primary one, the way she thinks, sleeps, breathes, dresses, prays, raises children, all of these customs connected to her presumably have no relationship to any other group, or she has it within her group, but not to the group next door, not to that group being part of a nation, and not to that nation being part of a region, right? Or maybe a poor nation. You see what I mean? These issues never come up in the ethnographic present. And that's one of the reasons why that has been so critiqued, the ethnographic present, which characterizes ethnography and field work par excellence. So, the thing that we are definitely not going to do is rewrite our autobiographies. We are not going to eliminate relationships, whether between our own personal identity within the group that is within this particular group, or any of the other groups around it, or those relationships within the nation, or beyond. Benadel, you gotta put that down. Just put it down. That's okay. Just leave it alone. I just want it there for the record, you know, because I want you to. I want you to keep writing. I just noticed that you were doing it. Now I have to start over so you can write it. Okay? So I'll stay in the same place so you won't get nervous. Okay? So if you were to go to the New York Times, rather to the microfiche or microfilm of the New York Times of the day you were born, okay? The day you were born. And you were to see, well, what was happening when I was born? And how does the front page of the New York Times tell me of the issues? What does it say about the issues that had to affect what happened in my life after I was born? See what I mean? That's what you're doing then is you're building context for your life. You are working towards an ethnobiography. It's got ethnic specificity, but it's got the story of your life, but it doesn't go into this ethnographic present. It starts looking at relationships, and your life is right here, but it relates to, in a sense, you could put it this way, not just a circle, but a spiral, huh? Because those relationships span out. So, I'm not going to tell you when I was born, but for purposes of argument, let's say it's around World War II. Okay? So, that's an important fact that governs what happens, what the issues were for my parents as they were raising me. Was my father in the armed services? Were the first 5 years or 6 years of my life governed somehow by the post-war environment in this country? What was happening to black people after World War II? As I look back over the century, how would I position my life in terms of post-World War II situations? You see what I'm saying? So what were the relationships? How did that's just one incident or one aspect, one question. So what we're going to do is, as an exercise in a little bit, we're going to construct a life. And we're going to use some of the strategies on this paper by constructing a life of someone, let's say, 1965, then what are the issues governing, let's say, someone born in 1965 or 1970? What were the assumptions that they could make that their parents couldn't make? How did that determine relationships? Okay? So, is that plain so far? You following me? So this ethnographic present, let me just go Let me give you an example of some of the ethnographies that I like because they don't do this ethnographic present. That is, they describe a place, but then the real world kicks in. It's not some little village someplace that has no connection to the nation state in which it is, nor assumes that the nation state has no relationship to the other nation states, nor does it assume that the region then doesn't have any kind of global meaning in terms of geopolitics, right? One of my favorite anthropologists, or one of my favorite ethnographies, is by Janet Siskind, who wrote this book called To Hunt in the Morning. It's the one that came to my mind the minute I thought of one of my favorite ethnographers. Janet Siskind is like this typical, young white, maybe feminist, maybe not, anthropologist. And one of the problems of anthropology is that the farther away you go into quote-unquote sort of slightly dangerous, different, adventuresome territory, the more cultural capital your ethnography is going to have, right? So if you do research in some place real close to home, it's harder to make that seem really powerful and exciting, and that's been a drag on the field of anthropology because it has led people to invent.
Isn't it when Kennedy got shot?
December of that year.
When was Shelly born?
September.
Kennedy? I think it was November.
22nd. I think it was November 22nd.
Yeah. What else happened?
Betty Friedan's The Feminine Mystique.
It's
I don't
published
know if
then?
that has anything to do with this, but yeah.
We're going to go to each of these that you mentioned in just a minute.
When was Martin Luther King shot? That's 68. 68?
No, but what happens in 1963?
Was that the, when he gave his speech?
Yes.
March on Washington?
March on Washington. In August of 1960. What else was happening?
Television or not? Television? A lot. Yeah.
Wait, I can't hear.
That television was becoming a huge thing.
Are you talking about the specific year or in general? Like the 60s was known for free love and drugs, birth control pill was introduced. I mean, there's...
Okay, well, let's put this under here, under Friedan. Birth control. Okay, what else?
Vietnam.
Vietnam.
Civil rights.
Wasn't there a lot going on with the corruption of unions at that time too? In the early 60s?
In the... Okay. A white collar job with the same fees as a white person, a white man. That's true.
So does the mother work? And what does
Does
she?
she?
Do? She's a teacher.
If
I think
she's
she
well
definitely
educated,
works.
she's a teacher?
A teacher?
Mother white, a teacher, okay? Boy, Shelly has got an interesting, now someone asked me what kind of new community. I'm thinking of one in St. Louis, and I actually know people who lived in this kind of planned, someone used the term planned community, and apparently Erica knows what I'm talking about, where they're kind of very self-conscious, so many people of this ethnicity, so many people of that ethnicity, and this is where all of the interracial marriages in the entire town were, at least in St. Louis. I don't know if that's any of
We both grew up in the same town. It was sort of like this, but we're disputing over it right now.
It was
so
a
we'll have
planned
to research
community.
it.
Was it like this, that,
I don't think that there was
I
an
think it was.
ethnicity ratio that was set up from the
Yeah,
beginning.
how much do I have you guys remember?
no, share it, share it.
Well, because they used to have these they used to have these festivals. Remember the ethnic festivals that they
Well, there
had
was an
every Sunday at
intention, but I
Lincoln
just don't think there was
Plaza?
a ratio. There
Well,
was
I don't
an
know if
intention, but I
they
don't
did it
think-
like by
yeah.
affirmative action, like
Right.
type of, like quote, what are those
Quotas.
things called? Quotas, but I think that they definitely tried to do it.
They tried to have a mixed community. That did not happen often in the 60s or 70s. Yeah, I'm telling you, you can, but almost every town that was the size of Milwaukee or bigger had at least one such community. And a lot of interracial couples gravitated towards those communities.
So who created those and like was in charge of them?
There's, what are the people called that like plan towns?
City planner.
City council?
Yeah, just like, urban
Urban
developers.
It was, in the case of our town, it was a guy that had a lot of money, he just bought land and decided to start something. So it
That was like inventing a whole town though.
yeah, it was pretty, I mean, it wasn't really, it was pretty artificial, like there wasn't.
But that's very interesting, because there are those towns in different, those environments in different towns, which they only seem strange because life, especially in the 60s, but certainly still in the 90s, is partially segregated still, especially in residential communities. So, okay, so now we know a lot about Shelly, right? And her chances.
Is she an only child?
Well, is she?
I don't think so.
I think she's the youngest.
The youngest of how many?
4.
4? Okay, she is
She had more children back then after the war.
the youngest of 4. Okay, how old are her parents?
They were in their late 20s
Yeah.
when she was born. And they started having
They
kids in their
have-
early 20s.
They started having kids in their early 30s.
Okay, so one right after the other. When did she become a teacher?
The mother?
She's
As a
part-time.
21-year-old.
Huh?
As a 21-year-old. As soon as she graduated from college.
As soon as she graduated from college, she became a teacher and then started having 4 kids. No, but you see, you have to,
It's possible.
but it's possible.
Yeah.
She
It
could
was
be a
definitely
sub.
possible.
She could be a
She could
substitute.
just-
But I don't think that would be
She could teach
realistic for her to
part-time.
have enough
She could
money.
because I feel like the father maybe gets a small pension from the government, and I feel like if I had to.
She teaches, okay, no wait. Well, does he work? Does he have a job? Because if he has a day job, she could teach night classes.
Well, he was blinded from a job accident back in '63. I wouldn't doubt that he had any kind of work.
He was blinded
Well, blind people work.
since 1960, you said? Did you say that, Susan? 1960, he was blinded on the job?
Well, I think he was thrown in jail in 1961.
Come on,
When
man.
are the
lay off.
Panthers founded? From what, being a communist or a Panther?
A combination of the few.
It
Being
wouldn't
a
have happened in
Panther
1961. When would this have happened?
In the 50s.
I don't think it would have been 1961. But you see what you have to do? That's really interesting. Why was he thrown in jail in whenever it was? It wouldn't probably be, I mean, could he have been a Black Panther in 63?
But
Mm-hmm.
They started in 57. They didn't start outreach though until like that, around that time.
Around this time?
And they were really big in Chicago, so they probably,
Yeah,
they're probably pretty sizable Black Panther Party in Milwaukee, because it's
Mhm.
really close to Chicago.
But you see how you have to, see all the questions that are emerging as you know, as you try to craft this in order to find out what was going on and so on. I mean, it's easier when you're doing your life, you know, when you're doing your life. But look at all these issues that reflect on what your life chances were. Hmm? So, this is happening in 1963. Then how is this, let's jump ahead 10 years. How has this affected Shelly, who is now 10? This is real.
Well, I know something that wasn't mentioned was affirmative action, so maybe her father got a better job because affirmative action was being created from 63 to 73 and sort of implemented.
When did the Disability Act get passed? That also would help. I'm not sure when that was passed, but that definitely would have helped him get a job too.
So he probably, and also if affirmative action is just beginning, one of the sins of affirmative action, that affirmative action had was this whole, but that didn't really start until 1970, where if you were a woman and Black, then people could count you twice. You know, so here he is a minority and blind, and he's disabled. So a company that hired him would be able to perhaps get, depending upon what kind of profession he had, extra monies from the federal government. But you see, this just doing this unfolds all of the. One of the things that it shows us as American people, just our conversation, is our lack of history. It's so hard to do this because we don't have cultural memory in our society. And what you have to do is to piece together cultural memory in order to create this. And sometimes you're going to have to be creative, and you're not going to remember the exact conversation, but piece together something. So that you would have to mix your narrative. Can you see? Mix your narrative with describing these phenomena and how it related to the society. Why were these important, and how would this affect a child of 10? So if she's biracial, if we can go by Lazar, it's a woman, right? So she's biracial. In 73, she is now 10. What has her life been?
Maybe by this time she's,
What does she look like?
she's not light skinned.
She's not light skinned. Okay, so she looks like her father.
Yeah.
Looks like Dad.
So her dad's not light skinned either.
No, you could be light skinned.
Okay, she looks like her father, and obviously Black is what you're saying, right? Okay. Okay. What does that mean for Shelly? Because she's in, give me a name for this planned community. St. James, right? She lives in St. James. She's gone to school in St. James. What does that mean?
How mixed is St. James? Is it a working class community? It's a new community?
These communities are rarely classic working class communities. They're very mixed with people who are slightly different. They're not the classic working class. The classic working class community is not that. It's either a classic Black, community where a lot of working class people are, or white. And white working class would not be welcoming to this. And this group, the Black working class, would be slightly more welcoming, but not 100% either.
So do they live in the poorest house then, in that new community, since they're working class and have poor kids.
No,
Is it
this
true?
isn't likely because of this. It's just not likely. If for no other reason than the fact that the mother is a teacher.
I think they moved in those 10 years.
Okay, Jen,
Really, I
where
do.
did
I
they
think
move?
that maybe with better job opportunities in other places, and if they are well-educated people or whatever, maybe this place doesn't have, you know, it's not a place where they can progress into being whatever they want to do. I
Yeah,
don't
but
know.
these new communities are supposed to be like the most progressive communities.
Oh, really? I
Because
missed that.
they're like, well, I don't know, I'm thinking from the ones that I know about that aren't urban, but like they're supposed to, like people come to them because they want to be different, because they want to have a different kind of education, and they want to be around like different classes or cultures or whatever, and so they move to this community.
Okay.
And they are generally well educated, and they generally have sort of middle class jobs.
Okay.
So, I mean, I think that it's great having Joanna and Erica who have, who can give life to St. James, because these communities do exist. And the interesting thing about the United States is that they have been one of the few places where difference has been not just tolerated, but welcomed. That is a serious fact. You know, that just is. But, you know. So if they moved, it would have to have been for some really good reason.
Well,
Like
it
they
could
couldn't
be, the
afford
town
it
could
there.
change too. I mean, our town has changed a lot to the point that right now I don't think it's really distinguishable from any other town. It doesn't really maintain the views that, and the values that it started out with.
Or you could say that it became, let's say, upgraded or gentrified, in which case it now is more white, in which case it would be harder for this kind of family. So where would they go in those 10 years?
Maybe they'd move to a more working class neighborhood that's like further on the
Why would they
outskirts
do
of the
that?
city.
Why would they do that?
Maybe. It depends on their jobs.
Ever since they've moved to a college town. They moved to Olympia.
I don't think so. Not in 1973, I don't think so.
I would think they'd move to a place that, if this community started becoming, you know, increasingly sort of white and not as progressive, they would try to maybe move into a city where maybe things are more,
And where they
things are
find
happening
support.
more.
Okay, so they would move to a larger, so St. James would
Maybe
be
Chicago.
Okay. Or into the heart of Milwaukee. So St. James may have been a part of Milwaukee, but St. James is like a suburb, one of those little planned communities on the outskirts of Milwaukee, but now they're more in the inner city because that's where inner cities have a tendency to still be mixed, at least in parts of them. Does that make sense? Okay, but how, we still have to talk about Shelly. What has her life been like? How has this affected Shelly?
Well, for one thing, her parents are really busy, it seems like, so I wonder who's taking care of her. Like, if she's the youngest, are her older siblings taking care of her, or does she have grandparents? And what are they like?
Well, her siblings could not really take care of her because they're barely older than she is, because after all, the parents were in the late 20s when she was born and they already had 4.
Well, but one could be like 5 years older, which would be
So by the time she was 10, they were.
The mom would have had to have been born in 1935 if she was 28 when she had Shelly.
Good thinking. See?
Wait.
Okay.
Hold on, what?
The mom would have had to have been, or 22 years old, no, born in 1935, in order for her to be 28 when Shelly was born. And if you figure she went to school for at least 4 years, she was 22 when she got out. That gives her what?
6 years.
6 years to have 4 children.
Maybe they're
That's
twins or something.
But that's possible.
6 years is plenty of
Which
time. to
brings
have
up the idea that her parents lived through the Depression, which changes you also.
I don't think you
Very good
Well,
thinking.
what
And
I-
what is the likelihood, though? When does she go back to work? I mean, when does she have a job? She got her education as a teacher, but she's had these 4 kids, which means she has not been teaching.
There's a lot of social pressure on working moms at that time.
So maybe they have an aunt that lives with them.
Maybe she has a daycare in her house. I'm serious.
Mhm.
No,
No,
have
a lot of
daycares at
people
their
do
house.
that. A lot of
Or
people
the
do
dad
that
could have
then.
stayed home if he wasn't working until they moved.
So are you saying that the mother, that's not, you see that you're making it not logical. It's not logical that he's the stay-at-home parent when that many children. With that many children, with all this mother stuff, that she's the one who would stay home. But the problem is that they probably had to move from place to place, given the political stuff that, let's say, he's connected to.
And see, that's where Betty Friedan comes in, because she wrote The Feminine Mystique, which the women stayed home and took care of the kids in suburbia land stereotype, and they're not happy being at home, they want to be out working, and so it's a real issue with them. They want to work, they want to develop their
But Betty
talents.
Friedan didn't really write this for Shelley's mother. Betty Friedan wrote this book for upper middle class white women who stayed in those kinds of basically families, not for somebody who's in this situation.
Yeah, she's already struggling and out in the world a lot.
But the whole issue of, let's say, what happens to the Panthers, I mean, they basically are exterminated in this period. Mhm. And,
I just said, oh.
yeah. I mean, not all of them. There are a lot of them around now writing bestseller books like David Hilliard or Elaine Brown or whoever. So I just saw Eldridge Cleaver on television. So I'm not saying that they, but the likelihood is if they were both this and this, they had to leave this town between 1963 and 1973 for political reasons.
And they moved to Reston, Virginia, the planned community where I grew up.
With that in
And they're
1973?
That's when we moved there in 1974, and it was pretty mixed, and the neighborhood I grew up in was subsidized government housing.
And was it tolerant of people who were politically outcast?
Well, they might have been hiding out in Reston.
Maybe he's in jail. Maybe he's in prison for doing some stuff.
He could very well be in prison, although you can't imagine how he could be blind and in prison.
Yeah,
For
it
being,
seems like
I
he
mean,
would
the kind
blade
of,
off some
the
of that
kind of
stuff.
stuff that Panthers went to jail for usually involves sight.
I mean, he could have been railroaded into prison, even though he might not have done it.
Okay, he was railroaded.
Maybe the mother went to live with her mother so that she could work and her
Ah,
mom took care
now
of
this is interesting. The mother went to live with her mother in an all-white community. Here we are. Yes.
Black child.
With these 4 black children. That's where this, okay. Shelly's mom, okay. For whatever reason, we haven't figured out Dad yet, went to live with her mother. In a quote-unquote normal, because we want to say residential segregation is normal in the United States, in a normal white community where she was raised. What has happened to Shelly?
Well, for one thing, she would have left all her friends.
Hmm?
She would have left all her friends back in her.
Uh-huh, okay, so she's kind of lonely, isn't she? For a whole bunch of reasons.
Yeah, she'd have a hard time making new friends in the new school.
Mm-hmm.
She'd be one of the ostracized.
When you say she feels different?
Yeah.
Her mom also works at the school she goes to, and so that makes her even more ostracized.
Oh my God, so the few black kids who are there don't want to have anything to do with her either, okay? So she has few friends,
The other black
either black or white. Oh, but we have a good idea of Shelly now.
Because of tracking, she maybe never gets into any of the honors classes. They kind of throw her in the regular or the remedial without.
Well, no, that's not true. Sarah, right? Sarah said her mother works in the school. Her mother would not allow it. We have to say, any woman who is bold enough, a white woman, to marry a blind black panther who's also communist, she is not going to let Shelly or any of her kids be tracked. Not in a school. She's teaching. She's just lonely. This is enough of a burden. She has no friends whatsoever.
But
She
she's
has her
also,
siblings.
yeah, she has her siblings.
She has her siblings.
But they're old enough, they don't really want to have much to do with it. The oldest one is not going to be in the school she's in anyway.
Oh, gosh.
Like
Rashida?
Rashid.
That is good. You've got a good, you're latching on to this. You can put yourself there. See, you're putting yourself into this life, okay? But, so the whole question of, this is irrelevant, in a sense, to her mom's life. In 10 years, there have been other assassinations.
Yeah, Edgar Evers and.
So like, she's grown up, she has become a human being in a decade of assassinations of leaders of the country. That is serious. Just imagine. Not just Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, Bobby Kennedy, Edgar Evers. I mean, it's just, okay, this has been a crisis. Being black has not been a day at the beach in this decade. And she has lived, all of them have lived, the whole family has lived basically in a crisis situation.
But could you say, you say being black, now, I look at it as not just being black, but being a product of a white and a black couple.
Right.
So therefore, she may get even more flack from that.
Right, because she has, because she's living with her mother, she is isolated from, let's say, the black community, and because her, let's say, since her mother never left this neighborhood, let's say for all practical purposes, her mother really felt kind of funny whenever the grandchildren came, because it meant that she had to go against the world. So her mother never really embraced this situation, which means that, and she either had to stay, maybe she stayed close to the black part of the family, but then when they move to this community, Shelly cuts those ties. She has no ties whatsoever.
So she assimilates and then also denies her identity, basically assimilating and trying to.
Okay.
What about her dad's family?
Yeah, but her dad's family's over here in this planned community. They left that, right? In 10 years, they're now living over here. Okay, so she denies her identity.
And finds false happiness. Just kidding. I was just saying, finds false happiness.
And by just trying to not see it. Now, she doesn't have to be biracial to go through this.
She doesn't.
To deny her identity. I mean, I had a Japanese accent that was so thick you could cut it with a knife when I was about this age, because I didn't want to be black. I lived in a mixed black and Japanese neighborhood in Los Angeles, and my parents were just hysterical. They didn't know what, because they knew I was going through an identity crisis of enormous proportions, and they didn't know what, how to deal with it. Yeah. So, I mean, it's just a really, so you don't have to be, and I'm not biracial, so this crisis, especially if it starts hitting around 10, once you're aware that you are a specific gender and that there is an opposite. Once that comes through, all kinds of stuff hits. You don't have to be biracial, but this is certainly very possible for Shelly. We ran out of time, but do you see how you can just, you see the richness of the possibilities? You would do the research to pull this out.
What do you want us to research? Like what type of topics, just to throw some into
Remember,
the wind?
And I got some questions about this ethnobiography stuff
Okay.
too. And just about the assignment.
Just do the assignment for next week and then it'll emerge, but use this as your guide. The question of domination and power and hierarchy is like the lens,
Okay.
Tracy, that you're going to use as you try to craft some period in your life, and the first hour of next week's workshop before team number 1, where's team number 1? Before team number 1 does their, oh right, we have 3 people without teams. Team number 1, raise your hand.
It's me and Lisa, and I think Francis went to another
Okay,
group.
but let's just say that that's got 3. Number 2, okay, wait a minute, just in case, a bird in the hand is worth 2 in the bush. Sarah, you're with, also on that team, because we can't afford to not, can you sort of help Sarah understand that? Number 2, who's on, how many people on team number 2?
Just 2.
You've got 2 and they're both here? Okay, you should have 3 though. So, team number 3. Nobody's here for team number 3? Okay. So that's going to be Tenora and Erica. You're number 3. We won't worry about any more after that. Which one were you on?
I don't have one still. I'm 7. We should do it again.
Okay. We may have to.
Yeah.